Book review 2 from Mr. Campbell at this point. This time, Beloved. This was written by Toni Morrison and published in 1987, and it was pretty critically acclaimed, but still is known as pretty much a classic in literature. It received a Pulitzer, and it led to Morrison herself earning a Nobel Prize. As for how I'm going to go over the rating itself in this review, I kind of have a couple key points I want to talk about. There's the intro, how I think it sets up the rest of the novel, how it hooks you, if I think it did hook me in general. There's the style of the novel, how Morrison writes it. I'll talk about whether I like that or not, if I think it's confusing, if I think it's clunky, anything like that. There's the actual plot of the novel, if it captivates me, if I'm actually like invested in it. There's the characters, how I think they're developed, if I think they're boring, or if I think they're really, really complex and interesting. And then there's the ending, if I think it's a satisfying ending that kind of wraps up everything in a nice little thing, or if I think it's like bad. But before I get to the actual like review part of this, let's do a quick little summary of Beloved itself. So the way Beloved is written, there are 3 sections, and it's kind of a non-linear timeline. What happens is there's a present timeline, and then what happens a lot throughout the novel is we learn a bit about the past randomly thrown in there. So it's a little skewed timeline, so I'll give my summary the best I can. So kind of focusing on the present timeline, Setha lives with her daughter Denver in a haunted house. One day, Paul D, a man who was formerly enslaved with Setha at a plantation, finds them, and he scares off the ghosts and kind of starts living with them. However, one day, as they're coming home, they find an unconscious woman near their house. They take her in. Turns out her name is Beloved, which is the same thing that Setha inscribed on her dead daughter's grave. She moves in with them too. We eventually find out the backstory of how Setha's dead daughter died, which is slave catchers found Setha up in the north, and rather than have her and her kids taken back, she decided to try and kill them all so that they wouldn't have to go through that. She ends up killing her daughter. The rest of her kids survived, and they end up staying in the north. Now, a man tells Paul D about this, and Paul D, he confronts Setha, and he's like, I'm out of here. He doesn't support it. He leaves. That's the end of section 1. Section 2 begins with Setha living with Denver and Beloved. She now believes Beloved to be her daughter. But then in section 3, things kind of start breaking apart. Beloved becomes too needy. Setha is focusing all on her, neglecting Denver. So Denver decides to go out to the community, ask for help. Eventually they come back, they try and help her get rid of Beloved. And what ends up happening is, in a big scuffle, Beloved ends up leaving, never to be found again. Eventually, Paul D comes back to help Setha because she's kind of broken at this point. And the story ends with Denver being the caretaker for Setha, Paul D helping Setha, and Beloved is gone. Everyone kind of forgets about her. Alright, now you basically get the gist of the novel, so let's move into my review sections. The first one I highlight is a part where Paul D has just come to the house. Setha decides to open up to him about his past. She's crying to him. He's kind of being there for her. Right after that happens, though, the ghost starts kind of like acting up, throwing stuff. Paul D scares it away, which saddens Denver because to her, this was like her only companionship in the house. I think this section is a good representation of like all the criteria I have. It very much introduces the style that Morrison sets for the whole rest of the novel. One technique she uses is, in this scene and many others, she switches quickly between the perspectives of all the characters. And while this can be confusing, and it does take away a little sometimes because I have to like go back and read it a lot, once you piece it all together, it does add to the scene. It makes you see like a wider picture of everything that's going on. So I do like it, even though it can be confusing. So it's kind of like a middle ground kind of thing for me. Another thing I like is that it sets up the characters in this kind of intro. We see Setha, she's kind of like, we kind of think she's stoic, but like she's like opening up, being more tender with Paul D. Paul D, he's acting like as like a rock for Setha, but it sets up how his character is like inside, very closed off. He doesn't want to open up about his emotions. And then we learn about Denver, who seems pretty troubled. She was very sad to see a ghost go away, because to her that was her only friend, like I said. So we learn how she's kind of like socially isolated in this house, and that's kind of developed more further in the rest of the story. The second section I want to go over is the part where we actually learn what happened when Setha killed her daughter. And the thing I like about this is, way Morrison writes it's from the perspective of the slave catchers during this scene. So we kind of see how they view Setha and her family, black people in general. They kind of justify how they're acting, like they think Setha is like a wild dog, like, oh, this is why slaves should not have freedom. And I think that's a very interesting way to read it, because we get to see their own perspective, because like obviously they don't think they're evil, they think they're just doing what's right, like treating animals. And I don't know, I think it's a very different way of looking at it, and I think that adds to the novel. I really like the way she incorporated the style. I like the way it kind of fleshes out the characters a lot. Very much makes Setha's actions seem barbaric from his perspective, but later in the story it's kind of fleshed out her own motivations. As for plot, I think it's obviously a very key moment. It sets up the rest of the novel with Beloved, the character. Yeah, I do think the most interesting parts that we learn are the backstory rather than the main plot, and this is one of the highlights. Then the final section I want to focus on is the part where Denver decides she needs to take action, which I feel like is a huge character moment and one I really love from the book. So essentially throughout the whole novel, I didn't really like Denver as a character. I didn't blame her for not being socially able, based on her own backstory, but as a result, she was just kind of bland. Like, she was just constantly attached to everyone. I didn't really like her. But this is a huge development moment for her. She kind of decides she needs to step up. She can't let her mother keep acting like this, like weak compared to Beloved. So she decides to go out of her comfort zone and get some help. She bonds with members of the community, and she ends up becoming a whole new person by the end of the novel, and a character I really, really like. And she ends up being one of my favorite characters by the end of the novel. I think this is a really, really good character moment. She's kind of shedding her skin, becoming a new person, and it shows like role reversal for her. Like, rather than Setha being caring for her whole life, she kind of starts caring for Setha, who becomes in a weaker state. And I really like that. And then later, the novel ends, and the actual ending of the novel, I don't have any complaints about. You know, everyone decided to forget about Beloved after she left. It doesn't have too much great, like, it's not like a crazy ending. I don't think it needs to be, but it isn't. It's a satisfying ending. I don't have much to say about it. I'm not left dissatisfied. So I guess that's about it. So, to close off, my overall review for this is 4. It's a very good book. It takes a while to get used to, because her style can be very confusing, but it is very well incorporated. I think sometimes it's a bit excessive, but once you get used to it and you can understand it, it is very good. It's a very interesting read. It makes you do the work to piece everything together, rather than just giving it to you. You know, it's kind of like the show don't tell method in a way. The characters are easily the best part of what makes this novel a great one. They have a lot of development from the beginning to the end. They're basically new people, some better off than others. Like I said, Denver is one that stands out to me. The plot itself, I found more focus in the backstory. I found that more interesting than the main present plot. So yeah, 4 overall. Very solid novel. I don't know how I would approve it, but yeah. So that's my review. If you liked it, it's a YouTube video. You can like it, Mr. Campbell, if you so choose. Hopefully I have fun editing this, I guess. So much fun. Till maybe another book review you have us assigned. That's it.